Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Living on Lemonade podcast. As always, I'm your host Lauren. This is my second recording of the day. I'm just on a roll, so when I get these little pockets of energy and ambition, I just kind of go with it. So I did get organized. Today's episode is one that I've hinted or talked about a little bit in previous ones and in anticipation of wanting to record it. I also knew that I needed to make some notes so that I could stay on track and so this episode I anticipate to be a longer one. I know I always say I'm going to try and keep it short and then it's always like 35 minutes, but I checked the one that I just recorded and it was 26. So I was like, hey, I did well. But I anticipate this one probably being a little bit longer. Now, let's dive in so I can get to the points. Today's episode is the gifts of healing. And essentially, I'm sharing more about my healing journey. I know I did a podcast episode kind of about that, but not as in depth about this. This is the benefits and like the nuggets and the gifts of doing the work. And when I talk about healing and doing the work, and if you're watching the YouTube video, you see that I'm putting in quotations, right? Because we hear it as a buzzword, but there's always there's always like a reason behind why things are kind of buzzy, but I oftentimes when they get kind of mass produced and talked about, it loses the potency and really the magic and goodness behind it. So when I say doing the work, I'm talking about things like counseling or having a therapist, having a life coach or a spiritual coach, leaning into mindful practices, having practices that you do throughout the day, having practices that help to regulate your nervous system and recalibrate it, and somatic practices. Somatic is with working with the body. So with the body, with the nervous system, healing and transmuting trauma in the body and from previous experiences, and just getting it out of the body so that your nervous system has more capacity. That's what I mean when I talk about healing and doing the work. So that can look like many different things. It can look like one thing, a combination, and we also go through different phases and seasons of life where we need different things. I'm in a season of more like nourishment, so I've been leaning into somatic practices and working with my body and integration. When I kind of get those like downloads, those hits of intuition and the wisdom, how can I integrate it into my everyday life? Because it's great to get that wisdom come to you, but if you keep it in your head, that's just knowledge. There's a difference between knowledge and like integrated wisdom, or like it's the difference between talking and walking, like talking the walk or walking the walk, right? If that makes sense. There's a lot of people, especially in like the wellness industry and spiritual stuff, that they know the buzzwords, but there's no depth, there's no embodiment of the actual practices, of the actual wisdom of it. When you meet someone who has actually done the work, they're like a living representation. Those are those people that you will feel magnetized to, and there's just a steadiness, there's a groundedness about them. And they just know how to navigate even the hard times when they might not feel grounded. So there's one thing that I didn't even write down, but being able to identify those people and know the difference. To dive into my points, I might like delete them as I go so I stay organized. We'll see how this goes. So it's like a little bit of a class, but in a podcast episode, I didn't like plan this as an official thing that I would put inside the Living on Lemonade group, but certainly I will share it this is kind of a class because I have notes, and I'll use a little bit of stories and story time and experiences to expand on the points. So the first thing that I wrote down here in gifts of healing is having more capacity for everyday life and being able to show up better for ourselves and others. Now that's kind of like a big overview point, but essentially when we're doing the healing work and we're looking at our own shadow, and that's another buzzword, but essentially the shadow is those parts of our psyche, our subconscious mind that we have deemed unworthy, or there might be shame around it, beliefs around things that we what's the best way for me to describe this? It's things that we have rejected about ourselves, or beliefs that we have learned that are like wrong, in quotes, wrong, that we don't want to act upon because we believe it's wrong. So when we see it in others, it can be triggering. That's another buzzword. Like there's probably going to be tons of buzzwords when I talk about it today, but whenever I can, I will give more context so it's not just a buzzword that actually has some depth and some understanding to it. Triggered being something, an experience, a belief, some like it's in the triggers shed light to the parts of ourselves if we feel triggered by something, and to explain that this is gonna be a long episode. It's if we feel like some sort of charge to something, like someone says something and it really irks you and you feel it, especially if you feel it just above your stomach area, the solar plexus, that's like personal power. If you have a kind of a visceral, like body somatic response to it, that's because it lives within you. Otherwise, you think of like electrons and stuff, like if it doesn't live within you, there's no charge to it. You're not going to feel it. So if you feel triggered by something, if someone says something or you're witnessing something and you have a response to it and it kind of heightens your reaction, you have a reaction to it, that's a trigger reaction, it's because it lives within inside of you. And triggers are it's like a trail to the gold, something inside of you that is ready to be healed. And it sheds light on that area that needs to be healed. And this is how, when we do the work, we work with a therapist or a coach or whatever to uncover these things. We do the somatic work, we do the meditation, so that we can sink into our bodies and build a relationship with it and uncover that those gems and those things that are ready to come up into the surface, and then we learn how to transmute and change, heal them essentially. So I totally went off on a side tangent of that, but because I mentioned those words, I did want to give a little bit of context. So when we have more capacity for life, we're healing these things that are kind of keeping us stuck. The triggers, or these places inside of our psyche, inside of our body, where we can hold and store trauma, limits our capacity for everyday life. It makes us less resilient, and it just makes us feel like we can feel victim to our own lives, to the externals that are swirling around us. And doing this work, doing the healing, having our practices, our regulating, breath work, or it's not like you have to do 45 minutes of breath work. When I say breath work, it's literally like tuning into your breath, changing your breathing patterns consciously, because otherwise we just breathe and our body physiologically will adapt our breath to whatever's going on around us. If we feel a threat, it's going to get shallow and kind of quicker. When we feel safe, we might have slower breathing, right? So when we can learn how to tap into these, what would normally be automatic processes, we can influence and change our physiology, which is really cool. So more capacity for everyday life, showing up better for ourselves and others. When we can show up more for ourselves, this is this is in the context of filling our own cup first. Put on your mask before you put on someone else's mask when you're on the plane and need oxygen. Society is very much against this. It is like, especially for women, men too, but I think very much with like mothers and stuff, society really teaches to always take care of others first. And it's always at the detriment of the mother. And realistically, when we think of from a nervous system perspective and being resourced, we can't show up for others if we are depleted ourselves. This is when we get more irritable, cranky, we're tired. So part of doing this healing work is being able to show up and understand those patterns and being able to quickly identify when we feel depleted and knowing how to resource ourselves. So if we're feeling cranky, when was the last time we ate? Are we cranky because we're getting a little hangry because our blood sugar level is low, and that's our body's response to say like, hey, you need to eat something? Did we not sleep well last night and we're feeling under-resourced that way? So make it a priority to get a good night's sleep or rest when, however you can. This also, when we're feeling under-resourced, we will feel more swayed by external things going on around us because we are depleted. So doing this healing work is learning how to resource ourselves and how to identify when we are under-resourced so that we can fill that cup again. I was talking in the last episode about when we hold on to things, when we cling to things, we feel, I was talking in the context of swimming, feeling the waves of the pool when I'm floating on my back and holding onto the edge, and just feeling like I'm being thrown around. And we can in life when we've got from early age experiences we don't even consciously remember. We're carrying baggage we not even consciously aware of, that makes us less resilient. Especially trauma, doesn't have to be big T trauma. It can be small experiences that we just decide things about ourselves, and then we carry that through our life until we kind of wake up to it and we start to see these patterns and how they are no longer serving us. Survival patterns, coping mechanisms, trauma responses. I'm not going to go into like those three. I could do an episode on that if that's something you want. If there's any terms that I'm using here, because like I use them, it's just kind of part of my everyday language and understanding. So if there's anything ever in any of my episodes that there's something that like, I heard you talk briefly about this, I would like to know more about that, let me know. Send me a message. I'm happy to like create an episode on it to give more context and understanding from like a grounded perspective and not just like buzzwordy that you hear kind of on social media. Where was I going? Externals, being thrown around. We can feel like we're just being thrown around by life, and that's not a fun feeling. So doing the healing, doing the therapy and all the things allows us to build resiliency to when life gets hard. And one parallel I was just thinking about right now that came to me intuitively is one kind of saying that I made up after doing cold dips for a while is I started saying from my own experience, if I can breathe through the cold, I can breathe through life. And it's so true because I do this conscious breath work to prep my body to go into the cold. I breathe through the cold so that I can bring my breath rate down after I have that shock response when I put my core in. And then I'm good. I'm calm, I'm grounded. And what I started noticing is in everyday life, when things start getting kind of heated and maybe I have a conversation that gets a little bit heated or whatever the subject matter is, or just life is lifing, and I start to feel kind of activated, my nervous system kind of is kicking into gear, that sympathetic fight or flight response, I now very naturally come back to my breath, and I start to take some very conscious, like deep, long exhale breaths, and that helps to kind of re-regulate. So we start to be able to work with these tools that we can learn in therapy or with practitioners of, yoga, breathwork, TRE if you're doing somatic stuff, and it just helps us. It helps us to not feel like we're in the dryer of life, just being tossed around with a bunch of other shit, right? So there's my stuff. What do we got here? More self-awareness. We notice patterns to identify and heal. So I kind of, I said that briefly before, but we start to see when things come up, because we notice it, especially if you do somatic work, like working with the body, you'll notice when things kind of feel uncomfortable or they just don't feel right. It feels like a no. If you're, say, people pleasing, this is related to, I've got it down here with, moving from like fitting in to belonging. So we start to learn about these patterns through I mean, you can do your own education too. I don't just work. I do therapy. I do like kind of chunks of it, right? And I'll go through seasons where I'll be doing it, and then integration. That's important to know. Because it can be a slippery slope and a bit of a trap to always think that you need to be in therapy or, working with someone on this stuff. I think it's very valuable and in my opinion, from my experience, to have those quiet periods, because you can learn your entire life. And I am someone, I'm a student of life. I love learning. I'm always curious about things. However, what I have learned is it doesn't mean like the things that I'm learning, especially like going into the depths and these really beautiful lessons and wisdom, it really doesn't have any depth to it if I don't spend the time to integrate it into my daily life. Otherwise, it's just staying up here in my brain, right? It's just knowledge. Wisdom is felt in the body. So knowing that there's going to be phases where you're going to go into the depths, you're going to be doing all the learning, and then like there's that period, and then take time away from therapy, away from reading the books and the self-help and personal development stuff, and really practice what you've been learning. Let that be your practice. Let that be your learning, is walking it every day in everyday life. That just creates more self-awareness. You start to see patterns. It's really cool how things can kind of come up, and there's a timeliness, and there's something you might have like learned from reading or in a therapy session that it doesn't click till later, until you actually have an experience out in the wild, that it's like, oh, that's what that really means. And like you can feel it. It's really cool. The difference between like just kind of knowing something in your mind to like being able to speak about it from experience. That's when you know someone really understands something, is when they can truly like speak about it easily and with examples and experience and stories and stuff, right? What else we got here? Curiosity. Curiosity is like it's required in learning and healing. You got to be curious about what you want to, what is there to uncover, and keep an open mind. And this also, it'll become a practice of non-judgment, because there's going to be some stuff that comes up. Like healing is not easy. It is messy. You gotta hold the mirror up to yourself. It is wildly uncomfortable a lot of the time, depending on what comes up and how deep in the depths, especially if you've been making it wrong your whole life and now all of a sudden you're facing it, having to shed light and understanding and love, starting to love it so that you can integrate it and learn the lessons from it. It can be very uncomfortable, very unnerving. So healing work, doing the work is not for the faint of heart, but you can start small, and then you start to kind of build up the muscle for doing it. It is like kind of like weightlifting, right? For our own personal development. It's kind of cool. But going on the string of curiosity leads to learning, right? It learns to discovery and evolution. And when we truly learn and we embody it, we have a depth. There's a depth and an understanding. And in the context of others and how we show up in the world and how we interact with others and how we can understand others, it builds and expands our capacity for compassion and empathy. And man, this is the message I truly believe we need the most right now, with what's going on in the world. I cannot stress enough how much I encourage and invite people to face your own biases. Face the things that you get riled up about. How can you flip the script? Where can you learn more about these things that make you feel threatened, that you want to argue about all day long, so that you can understand? And that starts with curiosity. You have to want to learn and not let it influence you in the same way, right? I mean, this isn't to bypass things. I've talked about in earlier episodes and stuff, with the political and social unrest, like navigating it as an empath, using that fire that you have inside of you for change and stuff. So it's not just about spewing stuff. It's not about like neutralizing it so you don't have that fire, but being able to discern. And truly, for me, like on my journey, I've just found it to be so profound that the more I discover things about myself and the more I come into a relationship with those things that I maybe made wrong or thought were just unbecoming and all of those things, the more that I look at those things and learn to accept. Acceptance is the first part. You can't truly like love and heal something if you're holding it outside of you. You have to bring it in and accept it as part of you and learn to love it. And that's a whole process. But as I do that, I have greater empathy for others. And I've started seeing myself, and this is my next point, seeing parallels and mirroring in life and each other. When we do the work on ourselves, when we hold up that mirror to ourselves and we start to uncover these like both great aspects that we want to build on, as well as the shadow parts where we've been rejecting them and keeping them suppressed, we will start to see them in other people. And if we've healed it in ourselves and we see it in someone else, we're not going to have that same kind of activation, that trigger response, reaction, because we've done the work and we've healed it. And we can have greater compassion, empathy of like, ooh, I remember what it was like to feel that way. And I see those person's qualities. I've seen them in myself. And it makes it easier to relate to others because we've accepted those parts of ourselves first, right? And we just see it as an extension of something we've come to accept in ourselves. And that's so beautiful, because then that kind of opens up a door, especially if we want to walk this path with others and lead the path with others. It makes us a natural leader, because it's like, hey, I've been there. I can I can accept you as you are in this moment, and also lead you to accepting yourself in a greater, more loving way. So it ends up being this journey of leading in from a place of love as opposed to a place of fear, because really there's only two options. You're either living from love or you're living from fear. That's a total other podcast episode. I'll have to do one of these days, but I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole right now. But if you want to learn more about that, let me know. Be happy to talk about it. It's been really profound for me. Building self-esteem, self-worth, self-love. So that just kind of summarizes some of the things I've already said. But as we work with ourselves, self-acceptance, it's really like building a relationship with ourselves. We can like go on dates with ourselves, but also doing this work, we understand these parts we've been hiding, and we just understand ourselves better. This is how we start to come into our own power. This is how we feel empowered and less kind of like swayed by life. We start to build this foundation that is grounded and from a place of love and curiosity, understanding, all these things I've been mentioning. And when we can do that, we can stand in our own power. We will stand up for ourselves in the ways that we need to, in the moments that we need to. And we'll start to stand up for others too, because we feel strong in our own groundedness, in our own just self. What's the best word I want to use? We just know ourselves, our own realization of who we are. Foundation of love allows us to move in spaces from fitting in to belonging. That has been a huge one for me. Oh my goodness. I was bullied as a kid. I was like kind of, a little bit weird, a little bit eccentric. I've always been quirky. I guess that's a good word to put it. I'm dorky. I call myself a dork, but sorry, I just need a little quick drink. The things that I have learned to love most about myself were the things that were often least accepted by others, right? And understanding it now and looking back, those are those things that people were probably, they on some level felt threatened by, because I've always been like the vulnerable kid. I've always been the emotional kid, and really influenced early in life. When I lost Nicole at 12, I made her a promise that I would live twice as big for both of us, and that I would lead from kindness as much as possible and from love. And a movie that was very foundational in how I kind of show up in life is called Pay It Forward. And it's about those random acts of kindness and paying it forward, doing kind things for strangers in the hopes that maybe it'll make their day better, because we never know what someone else is going through, right? So if we can show up in love and in kindness, those are ripple effects that go beyond what we'll ever understand. So I spent kind of the earlier portion of my life through those years of being bullied and stuff. It really, through socialization, kind of taught me the people-pleasing coping mechanisms to try and fit in. And I've explained it before, I'll explain it now because it's very relevant to this conversation. There's a difference between fitting in and belonging. Fitting in is changing who we are and how we show up so that we can be accepted by whatever group we're trying to, be in. Belonging is knowing who we are and being accepted. Knowing who we are and showing up exactly as we are and being accepted as we are. That's belonging. We don't have to change who we are. We don't have to act differently. We don't have to people please. None of that stuff. That is true belonging, when you can just show up in a room as exactly who you are and be accepted for it. So a big part of my healing and self-discovery journey has been doing the shift from fitting in, and not that I completely became a shell of myself or anything, because I've always just had the quirky things. Anyone who's known me for a long time just knows that, like, it's who I am. It bleeds out in any way, because there's enough of it. But there are absolutely parts of myself that I've been hiding, and still in some ways, but I'm learning through this work, through this healing, through the somatic, creating safety in my nervous system, in my body, that it's safe to show up as I am, because there's magic inside of me that people need to know about, and that I've always felt like I wanted to share. I was always that, because I started experiencing loss so young, I was always that friend that people would come up to when they experienced their first loss, and I could lead them through that, right? So, and then that's expanded further as I've really just fully embraced being a student of life and taking those times of study and then times of integration. There's more things I can speak about. All right, let's keep going. Greater discernment with external things. So we will naturally, at least from my experience, through learning, discovering, healing, because I'm building that strong foundation of like who I am, I am less, not always, we're humans, we get thrown into these patterns and stuff, and there's always things, but then it's a practice of like pausing and going, hey, oh gosh, where am I going with this? Am I back in the dryer being flipped around by things? This happens at work for me. That's an area, especially because I'm a Virgo, so it's like work is a center point. So some areas of your life you might find that you get like thrown into the dryer a little bit easier than others. So then that becomes the practice there, is recognizing when you're slipping into those patterns and saying like, oh, am I going to let that happen on autopilot, or am I going to choose to like create some space? So we can start to recognize things and discern whether it's right, or I don't want to say right or wrong, but I think better phrasing and language around it is it helpful or unhelpful? Is it healthy or unhealthy for me where I am right now in life? And so we can recognize these patterns faster, and just discern that, oh, that's somewhere where I've been, but maybe don't want to go into again. So what are my tools to take me where I want to go, and be conscious about it? It's living a more conscious life, essentially, and just not on autopilot by our survival mechanisms. That is very much natural because we're humans, we're mammals. So there's nothing wrong with it, but we can decide. It's like the difference between sitting in the passenger seat and letting our autonomic nervous system and kind of drive the bus, or we decide like, hey, actually, I'm going to get in the driver's seat now and drive this thing and create what I want to create. I have a few points here. Ability to surrender and flow. Like I was talking about in the last episode, when things change, we show up to things and it's like, it's not how we expected. How quickly can we just surrender and lean into what is and be okay with it? And in that leading down, ability to pivot and evolve. How quickly are we able to pivot? That's a sign of resiliency, right? So when we're doing these practices and therapy and somatic work and all that stuff, we're building nervous system capacity, which builds resiliency so that everyday life and even the big things that come in from left field, we're better equipped to handle, which is so important if we want to live just a beautiful, loving life, because we're not climbing into the dryer. Ability to pause and observe when we're starting to feel activated and we're starting to get a little spicy, a little turned up, right? I'm not immune to it. I have to catch myself. I catch myself regularly, especially with what's going on in around us and the polarity of things. It's heavy. It's heavy AF. I feel it. And so, but it's not an excuse to just get riled up and just scream into the void. I see people arguing about stuff. My husband was watching something on YouTube the other day, and they're having a debate, kind of like Democrat versus Republican, and they were both like talking over each other, and I'm like, this is such a parallel to like what's going on in the world right now, how polarized we are as a species, and it's like neither of them are like, I had to walk away because I was like, this is asinine. They're not, there's no point to what they're doing. They were literally like talking above each other at the same time. They're talking at each other, raising the level of their voice to just talk over each other. So when you're both talking, nobody's listening. So there's no opportunity to understand. And then the other part of that is, even when people do listen, especially when it's like heated or political topics or whatever, people only listen to respond. They don't actually listen to understand the viewpoint of someone else. And if I can encourage and invite you to do anything when it comes to these types of situations, listen to understand, because this is when we actually come together and restore our own humanity, right? And we don't have to agree with each other all the time, because we're not going to. We're not all the same. But when I think about like how polarized things are and how people are so far on the left and how people are so far on the right, the way to remedy that is to literally listen to understand, so that, like I was saying earlier, curiosity, learning, understanding, empathy, we can understand each other again as a collective, as humans, right? And not just as this label of Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. And I mean, I could go down a rabbit hole of just talking about that. When someone says like, I am liberal, that's an I am statement. That is like, you're identifying that's part of your identity, and the ego will always protect the identity. So that's why we get so fired up about this stuff. I try very hard to, and it's my journalism background, it's my curiosity. When I was a journalist, you couldn't write a story on one source. You had to get like at least two. But the more, you want a good collection, because you want different angles of things, so that you actually have a well-rounded story. And it's the same thing when I hear information online, on Facebook. Then with AI, that's a whole other freaking thing of like, what can you even believe? There's bots commenting, polarizing things. It's to feed the algorithm, the confirmation bias. The more that we like feed into this stuff, and I'm in the video, if you're watching the YouTube version, if you're not, I'm like widening my arm, the arm span. The farther away from the center that you get, the more polarized you get. So then you got people on the far left, people on the far right. In my opinion, they've just gone further down the rabbit hole with their confirmation bias, with the algorithms of whatever that you're consuming. And we lose our humanity by doing that. So coming in, and I do want to keep it on topic, but pausing and observing allows us to take that breath and just like, is this where I want to go? Am I actually listening to understand this other person's point of view? Is one of your values to really like keep your humanity and keep grounded in that and come from a loving place? It's conscious work. It is conscious work, because most people aren't doing that. And this is why we're so polarized in society. Everyone just is their own freaking autopilot, consuming all this content and news and getting the confirmation bias. And no, like, people are not getting curious about it and challenging their own biases, right? Because it's just like autopilot is just go with it and go, yeah, I believe that. I'm not immune to it, but I can tell you, I do make a conscious effort to be like, I don't know, man. I want to hear the other side of this, and then a third one, maybe a fourth, and then I'm going to make my opinion. And also, like, when I talked about discernment, when you feel strong in who you are, you also start to, when you hear these things, whether it's towards your own confirmation bias or not, your body will start to send you signals of like, if it feels kind of like contracting, it's like, that's a no. Something about this isn't right. I'm going to do more reading. I'm going to do more research. I'm going to educate myself more on this topic so that I have a well-rounded understanding and opinion of these things, right? If we do want to talk about politics and stuff. So for me lately, it's been this journey of when something is super polarizing on one side and I see a headline, I'm like, I want to see the opposite. I'm gonna watch the opposite newscast, and I'm gonna see what they're saying about it, and then I'm going to use some of the more neutral. There's very few of them left, but and then just my own discernment. So that's a long-winded story probably on how to actually put some of these things into practice, just in like the current situation of what's going on in the world. And then just to kind of sum that up, that last ability to, I had like 4 of them here, ability to notice, slow down, and assess from multiple angles. So that can be with politics, that can be world events. It can also just be in your day-to-day interactions with people, something just kind of doesn't sit well with you. How can you pause? Take time to pause. It's an invitation to take time to pause. Create a little space, take a couple deep breaths, keep that prefrontal cortex, that problem-solving, understanding parts of your brain online. So when we get all riled up and our autonomic nervous system takes over in that fight or flight, the prefrontal cortex goes offline, because then the survival parts of the brain, the amygdala, fear and emotional center, take over. And this is how we get all riled up and people scream at each other, right? We're not using our thinking brain. So there's no point. We need to all just take a breath. And there's been times when even at work, we had a situation, things got a little heated. And I said, you know what, like, I think we should just take a moment and like, not to seem like facetious or cheeky or anything, and like literally just like, let's just take a couple deep breaths, kind of like come back into our body a little bit. And why don't we just like take a seat and have a conversation, right? That's okay. Out in the wild, we got to do that. Sometimes things get heated. If we want to remain respectful, professional, loving, kind, we need to be able to identify that and just say like, you know what, I'm feeling a little dysregulated right now. I'm going to take a couple deep breaths. If you're feeling the same way, I might say, you know, I'm noticing you seem a little bit, activated, or like you might be starting to get a little bit upset. I invite you to just kind of take a couple deep breaths. I'm doing it for myself, and you're welcome to join me. And I'd like to continue this conversation, or perhaps we need to create a little bit of space and come back to the table, right? Because nothing is productive when it's set in anger and activation. I think these last couple ones are going to go pretty quickly because I feel like this is a pretty long episode. But greater nervous system capacity allows us to be more resilient and expand through discovery and learning. Talked about all that stuff. Integrating shadow parts allows us to lead from love, not fear. Seeing humanity around us allows more compassion and empathy. This is what we need. This is the medicine that we need right now in our collective, in society. We need understanding, because when we can understand people, we can see them in ourselves. And when we're doing the work to self-love, that love, it's literally like building the love inside of ourselves, and it starts to pour outwards, and we start to share it with others and lead from that place. Less judgment, less criticism. It's beautiful. I've noticed it in myself. Another thing about Virgo, we make things wrong. really good at it, quite honestly, but I'm aware of that. So when I start to do that, I get a little curious and go like, oh, I'm doing the thing again. Is this helpful in my relationship? Is this healthy in my relationship? Whoever I'm interacting with, or however that looks in my everyday, is this the best for myself and this person, or myself in this situation? And if not, how can I reframe this? Because I'm not going to go anywhere with it. And lastly, doing this work, waking up to these things and really integrating it and walking the walk helps us to be more connected to nature, to the earth as a whole, and to the collective belonging. And it allows us to live more peacefully. So that's the whole thing. I would love to see more of that in our society, in the collective humanity globally. I'd love to see us loving on ourselves so we can love on each other. It's going to solve a lot of problems, and just come back from these great polarizing places out into the extremes, and we start to move in towards each other. We meet in the middle. Doesn't mean we have to agree with each other, but if we can understand each other's perspectives, especially when you understand trauma and stuff, you get into those life lessons and such, you can understand people's views from the context of which they live, right? So especially if you know their story, it's part of the curiosity, understanding. You know their story, you know their background. You can see how these patterns all play together and how it can influence behaviors and beliefs and such. So that it's more of connecting and just understanding and being able to love. So I think I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope this message reaches the people that need to. And if there's anything else you want me to expand further on, let me know. I live and breathe this stuff, right? So come join us in the Living on Lemonade community on Facebook. I'm in there as much as I can and have the capacity for. It's getting better. I create more and more opportunities for gatherings and circles and stuff, and starting to build a collection of trainings and new trainings, and also packaging old ones for kind of more like as you go learning. I call it evergreen, so it's kind of like at your pace learning, so you can listen to modules I've put together. So I am building that at a really slow. I often want it to be faster and like I need to do this, but I'm just honoring myself and showing up when I have overflow as much as possible. So come join us in there. It's a nice place to hang out. Beautiful group of people. I'm considering actually taking the group or moving it off of social media. So if you have any opinions on that, let me know. I'd love to. If we've never met, send me a message on socials. Introduce yourself. I'd love to meet you. And yeah, I hope everyone's just hanging in okay. You've got some tools. If you need any questions, I'm happy to do an episode, or if I've already done an episode that you haven't listened to direct you to some resources that would help you just in navigating life with more grace and ease. That's my whole thing. So sending you love, sending you hugs, and I'll see you inside the next episode.